The following thrilling story is presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every bit helps this channel grow.
The Devil Shares a Body. From Beware No. 7, January 1954, Battle for the Soul, Good versus Evil, Within One Body. Throughout the long, unusually hot summer of 1919, in the fog-bound, war-wrecked city of Cherbourg, two men fought viciously for the right to dwell in the same body. Up until September 26, 1918, on the fifth day of the Second Battle of the Argonne, the body, 6 feet 2, gray-eyed and blonde, belonged to Roger Minot, an artillery captain. A shell from a German 77 knocked out the battery where he was fighting. Minot, wounded, was flung into the air by the blast and fell heavily against the steel hub of a field piece. Then an infantry unit from the German lines rushed the shattered position, and for 3 hours, while the evil tides of war swept over him, the Frenchman's body lay senseless in the mud. At the hospital, there was nothing to identify him. Even the insignia of rank was gone. The mended body that left the Cherbourg Hospital in the spring of 1918 was discharged as an amnesia case. But it was more than that. It was the body of a man whose mind was as wholly dedicated to evil as Roger Minot had been honest and devout. For 6 months, submerged in the memories of hate and blood, the injured, twisted mind within the captain's skull had fought to keep life in the broken body. It summoned to the battle all the wild, primitive forces that lie buried at the back of every mind, however civilized. And gradually, they gained the upper hand. The man who lived in Minot's body limped across the cobblestoned waterfront, unclean, unshaven, half-drunk, and utterly without moral scruple. He called himself Jacques Wazams. His days he spent snoring in the foggy sunshine. At night he roused enough to engage in begging or drinking. Inside of a week, the last of his army pay was gone, and his horizon-blue uniform was stenched with mildew from sleeping on the docks. But the situation called for no great amount of thought. As a fat merchant closed his shop for the night and started down the darkening street with a leather cash bag under his arm, the soldier derelict poised himself in a doorway, one hand gripping a belaying pin. The merchant's shadow approached the door. Wazams swung the weapon above his head. Suddenly a voice cried, "Look out, monsieur! Robbery!" The fat merchant jolted to a halt, then turned and scuttled back the way he had come. Wazam stood bewildered, one hand clapped across his mouth. The warning cry had come from his own throat. Shaken by a nameless terror, he lowered the stick to the ground. At the back of his head there was an insistent pounding, almost like the hand of an authoritative man demanding entrance at a closed door. But this was only the beginning of Roger Minot's fight to regain his body. At every turn, Wazams found his petty pilfering and begging restrained by a nervous force that usually began with a sudden, severe headache. And with this discovery, he noted something else. Crime acted as a buffer. After he had successfully fingered a man's purse, the commanding voice was quiet for a long time, evidently too shocked for words. He began to dream of a knockout punch, one dreadful act that would so horrify that voice it would be stilled forever. The pounding within his head became more and more insistent. In August, he returned to the military hospital seeking some relief for his headaches. To the hard-headed physicians there, he tried to stammer out his wild story. "Someone," he stoutly maintained, "is trying to crowd me out. Someone is trying to take over my body." "Drunk," one doctor said scornfully in recommending treatment. Another was sufficiently interested to record his babblings and to wonder if he might not be a hypnosis victim. That night, Wazams slept in one of the beds in the hospital's public ward. His head was splitting, he complained. The nurse gave him a sleeping powder. Through the night he lay rigid in the hard cot, fighting, sleepless. In the morning, the drug had worn off, and he sat up wildly in the pale gray light of dawn. At the end of the ward, the male orderly who was on night duty sat hunched over his desk, sound asleep. Beside him was a water carafe, the bottle of sleeping tablets, and a phial of iodine. Suddenly, all of Wazema's primitive fear and hatred became concentrated on this white-jacketed orderly. It was here in this very hospital that his troubles had started. Here he would end them. Without disturbing the sleeping orderly, he emptied the bottle of Veronal and the iodine into the thermos jug at his elbow. For a moment he stood, looking down into the water, watching the clear liquid become murky with poison. Then he returned to his cot. His headache was gone, the voice behind his head was still. At 6 o'clock, the hospital sprang to life. Just as the night orderly rose, yawned, and reached for the water jug, Wazems opened his eyes. From his lips rose a warning scream, "Don't! Don't drink! It's poison!" But the orderly grinned tolerantly, waved him off, and down the water. In an agony of despair, Wazems, urged by some strange power, dashed down the aisle of cots and plunged through a window 2 stories to the ground. The man who awoke in the prison hospital was Roger Minot, calmly lucid and intelligent. Through months of struggle, he had driven out the evil forces in his mind, and aided by the convulsive death leap of Wazems, he had moved back into the body that was rightfully his. As Minot told his story in court, jurists and spectators sat spellbound. The most important doctors in France took the stand to plead for his pardon. In simple, convincing language, the doctors explained what had happened. Roger Minot, honest, upright, and intelligent, was dying. As he fought for life, he saw evil everywhere, triumphant, and the good and virtuous dying like flies. His shattered, injured mind reasoned feverishly that if he too were evil, he too might live. And when his body did miraculously mend, his mind had clung even more stubbornly to this conclusion. Roger Minot could remember everything that had happened when he was Jacques Wazems, but his stubborn mind had insisted on going its own way. However, like a man under a spell, Wazems could not do anything that was against the code of Roger Minot without the previous owner of the body putting up a fight. Incredulous but convinced, the stern French jurists set him free. It was no mistake. Minot had a firm grip, now, on his mind and body. He lived to do honor to France as a scientist at the Institute of Technology, and to die for her again in the forces of the French resistance.